Everybody. Now, today, we need to talk about Stonewall. In case you're not aware, Stonewall is a charity that stands for lesbian, gay, bi, trans, queer, questioning, and ACE, LGBTQ+, people everywhere. To be fair, if you're not alone, if you find all those acronyms hard to remember, well, you can take a look at woke warrior Justin Trudeau, can't you? Have a look at this.
I will never apologize for standing up for an LGBTQ2+.
Nice one, mate. Well done. Anyway, now Stonewall was integral in fighting for gay rights, gay marriage, civil partnerships, etc. And it's done a huge amount of very worthy work when it comes to equality and fighting oppression and, frankly, bigotry towards a hugely diverse group of people. But the question is whether or not it has now gone too far. Stonewall stands accused of misinterpreting the law. It denies this. Equality law currently states that sex and gender reassignment are protected and recognised characteristics, but Stonewall backs gender self-identification, and many organisations that have been involved with Stonewall seem to believe that gender rather than sex is a protected characteristic. And this is a key issue, right? Is a man a woman if he says he's a woman? Is that all it takes? Is that the extent of womanhood, a feeling, a self-identification? I think not. I don't personally think that women threw themselves in front of horses so that someone with a penis could tell them what womanhood is all about. I've never had a period. I've never birthed anything. I won't go through the menopause, although to be fair, I've been close to it a couple of times and, oh, goodness me, never again. But what right does someone like me have to identify as a woman? And what right does Stonewall have to tell employers, universities, etc., how to interpret the law? But it's not just that, is it? Is there something more at play here? Stonewall so far has achieved basically everything that it set out to do, gay marriage and all of that. And they needed a new cause, didn't they? And maybe a new funding stream. They've set up the Diversity Champions programme, which these employers pay money to be part of it. And then they pay for advice on LGBT equality from Stonewall to keep up the woke work. If you don't pay them, you get bumped down their list of top employers. But Stonewall's influence doesn't just stretch to the business world. No. They're influencing politics as well. Scotland's civil service has agreed to delete the word mother from its maternity leave policy, naturally. Apparently, the Welsh government has been dictated to by Stonewall when it came to their interpretation of the Equality Act. It's getting involved in the education system, supporting things like children who identify as the opposite sex being allowed to use the changing rooms of the opposite sex. Now, I think we can all agree that this has at least the potential to pose huge problems for child safety. And let's be honest, the safety of girls more than boys. I would argue they're even asking devout religious believers to renounce their faith and worship at the altar of Stonewall's ideology instead. If you're a member of the LGB community, but you also happen to believe that women are women and men are men, then unless you renounce that belief, you're a transphobe. But despite having such a vast influence on businesses, politics, children, religion, society as a whole, there's no accountability. Stonewall won't come on for a discussion or a debate. Come on, not that bad. All that power, all that influence, no accountability. They're funded by the Welsh government, the Scottish government, NHS Scotland, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, for goodness sake. So, in a nutshell, that's us, isn't it? That's the taxpayer. Do you agree with Stonewall's views? I personally believe that if there was a referendum held tomorrow on whether or not children should be able to change their gender on their school register without parental consent, I think that will be voted down in massive numbers. There is an argument to suggest that many of Stonewall's current policies, especially with regard to the transgender issues, benefit a very small number of people, but impact absolutely everybody, despite the fact that most people are probably not in agreement with their aims. Now, this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's fair to say we need to talk about Stonewall. Yes, well, good afternoon, everybody. Let's go to Scotland first, so put your coats on. Stonewall have influenced official school guidelines, maternity policy, hate crime legislation, prison policy north of the border as well. First Minister there, Nicola Sturgeon, plans to allow people to change their gender at the age of 16, and she singled out that she will introduce gender self-identification as well. Well, joining me to discuss this is the women's rights campaigner, Susan Smith, from For Women Scotland. Thank you very much, Susan. Great to have you on the show. Now, Stonewall has had a huge impact in Scotland, Susan, hasn't it? Am I a woman if I say I am?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I would say not. But apparently... That would have been a huge turnaround for the books. According to the Scottish Government, yes, and we have been taking them to a judicial review recently. We've got an appeal coming up because they have a piece of legislation, Gender Representation on Public Boards Act, which says that they define a woman as anybody who has a female name or female titles or uses she, her as pronouns at work. So presumably this would mean that if you, Patrick, came into work tomorrow and said, today I'm Patricia, I'm using she, her pronouns, you could count as part of the GB News' quota for their female team, according to the Scottish Government. And we thought that was a problem. We thought that didn't fit with the Equality Act, and we've decided to take them to judicial review. But they claim they have the right to redefine women.
Just talk to me a bit about this. What is the reaction amongst the general population north of the border? Because Stonewall have been advising the SNP for some time, and they're still in power. So is that tacit approval from the general population, do you think?
I think most people still don't know what's going on. And I think most people still think when you explain what's happening, that it's utterly mad. I mean, probably a few years ago, I thought this was utterly mad, and I would have thought that people who are saying what I'm saying now must be mistaken, that this could never happen. Of course, this is ridiculous. And I think there's a real problem with how far the Scottish Government has been prepared to go down this route. And a lot of people just thinking that's completely absurd. They never do something that ridiculous, because it does sound ridiculous. It sounds insane.
People would say it's the total suspension of logic and medical facts. But hey, who could possibly say that's national television? But what's been the reaction to the deletion of the word mother from maternity policy on Stonewall's guidance?
I think that the podcast that Stephen Nolan did was brilliant, because it was a lot of this stuff is things that people have known about, but that was a really hefty piece of work that has brought it out to the general public in a much clearer way than I think we've had, and much more mainstream, even though unfortunately it's still only a podcast and it's not, say, on BBC Radio 4, which would be amazing. But it got it onto the Today programme, that conversation. So hopefully with things like that being reported a bit more, we're going to start to hear a bit more of the pushback and the comeback. The important thing about this word mother, and the reason it matters so much, is this is a legally defined word. And when you work to try to take it out, I think what's going on here is the same that's happened with woman and the word woman. Because if you try to get it out of official documentation, these lobby groups can then come back later and say, well, hey, nobody's using this word. The Welsh government aren't using it. The Scottish government aren't using it. The NHS aren't using it. Let's use birthing person instead, because that's their preferred choice. And they...
Yeah, but that's strange. No one says birthing person, do they? No, I mean that's not a thing, is it? Really? I mean, technically speaking, it is. People do give birth, but that's not really. Chest feeders. What's all that about? It makes it sound like a breed of animal. But anyway, when they're introducing gender self-identification, the Scottish Government says that changes will improve the lives of trans people while ensuring that the legislation doesn't affect the rights and protections that women currently have under the Equality Act. Where's the feminism in all of this?
Well, there isn't any. And this has been the issue that the podcast raised and that we've been raising, is that the government has only ever been listening to one side of this. They've had in this group who've done amazing work, and they've got other groups who say the same thing, who they also fund. And the problem with Scotland is it's a small, interconnected, Civic Scotland is small and interconnected, so it's liable to capture. And when you get these groups going in really deep into not just government, but other organisations, you are only hearing one side of the story. And the government has not been listening. And we've seen with the podcast the extent of the influence in the civil service. So there really needs to be a kind of root and branch examination of how far this has been allowed to go. And I don't think the Scottish Government should be proceeding with anything on the GRA until they have addressed how much of their policy has been written by lobbyists, because it's quite clear their policy is being written by lobbyists.
And that is an interesting one. I rattled off a few of the people who contribute to Stonewall earlier on in my monologue there, and some of those include the Welsh Government, the Scottish Government, NHS Scotland, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. So it is us, right? It's us, really, in a roundabout way. Let's be honest about that. That's our tax money, I suppose, to an extent. And there does seem to be a lack of accountability there, and there does seem to be a question mark over whether or not we should have more of a say about how much of an influence those people have on policy. But we can talk about that with my next guest, Peter Tatchell, very shortly. But Susan, thank you very, very much. Fantastic stuff. Susan Smith, co-director for Women for Scotland.